want to talk about church. So in my experience, people go to church for different reasons. Salvation, community, tradition. For me, I went to church for not as optimistic of a reason. So growing up, I was not a church kid. Like, I grew up around a lot of Catholic kids that I went to school with, and they were going to CCD, and they were having their first communion, and they were getting parties thrown for them, and I was like, that's cool. But I was not in the church, and because the only thing that I worshiped on Sundays was the Philadelphia Eagles, which, by the way, is a rite I still practice today. You don't like winners, sir? That's fine. I understand. That's cool. Yep, let's go, Phils. So all of a sudden, one day, when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, my mom decided that we were a capital C church family, which really just meant to me that she was going to drag my ass out of bed at 7:30 in the morning, and we were going to go to this service. And I'm not going to lie, it was pretty boring. I went to Sunday school, and I learned all the books of the Bible and all these stories, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I did all the things. And I hated it because I was like, this is terrible. And then I discovered there were girls there. And that was amazing, because at that point in my life, there were two things that were really important to me. One was girls. Two was playing guitar. And really, if I break it down, the only reason I wanted to play guitar was so that I could get girls, right? And so this was awesome, because I would sit in these church services with these girls, and all I had to do was say one line, which was, "This is so boring, isn't it?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, I know." And then I was in. But the biggest problem, to be honest, was that my congregation was not that big. And so I exhausted my options pretty quickly. And that is when I discovered the magic of church camp. Now, church camp is just like regular camp that you see on a Mariah Carey video, where there's a lake and there's fishing and there's boating and there's a craft hut and all that. The only bad news about church camp is that there was this giant tabernacle on the campus that you would go to 3 times a day. That was the bad news. The good news was that 3 times a day, you would go to this church and sit next to other girls from other churches. And so for a few years, every summer, I started dating this girl named Callie from church. And we had a really good time because we would sit next to each other during all these services. And over the course of the week, we'd have a good time. And then on the last night before the end of church, there was always this very big service. And all of the ministers and the leaders, they had ginned up all this excitement all week. And they'd be and then they'd turn it on us. And they'd be like, "You know why you had such a good time this week? You know why you made all these friends? It was because of Jesus." And we'd be like, "Hell yeah, okay." And if I'm being honest, I wasn't super into that. I was super into sitting next to Callie, who was super into whatever they were saying. And I was like, yes. And so they'd do these things called altar calls. And every summer, for 4 summers in a row that I went to this camp, Callie would go up and reaffirm her relationship with JC. And I was cool and I was into that, because she would come back sobbing, and I'd be like, "It's okay. And I wasn't really super into this, but I was stoked out of my mind that I was putting my arm around a real live girl. So I was in. Fast forward a couple of years into high school, like I continued on, and that's when I discovered another group called Young Life. And I know that Beth the Butts loves Young Life. I did too. It was awesome. I started in Young Life because this girl that I had a crush on invited me to it. And the way that she described Young Life to me was, well, I mean, people say it's a cult, but it's definitely not a cult. Which, like, is exactly what you say when you're in a cult. So I was dubious, but honestly, I got there and it was fun. We had a good time. As opposed to youth group that I always went to, we sang secular songs at Young Life. We would do Tom Petty songs and Blink-182, and the leader would play guitar. And we would have pizza, always. There was always pizza at Young Life. But right before, the leader would tell a story about his life or tell some sort of anecdote and always kind of shoehorn in some sort of Bible verse. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm familiar with this. This is how it works. The other thing that was really cool about Young Life is that Young Life also had camps. And so I was like, sign me up, let's go on a weekend. And so there was this one time my junior year when we went to a Young Life camp in upstate New York, and it was a 6-hour bus trip. And I was excited for 2 reasons. Number one, it was 6 hours on a bus with a girl that I liked. I brought a big blanket and was very stoked because I knew the leaders were going to be half-assedly watching me the entire time. The other was that there was a hot tub at this resort, this camp. And that meant bathing suits, which, by the way, is basically underwear. So I was in. So we all get up to this camp up in upstate New York, and we're in the dorm, and we're like unpacking, all the guys. We're talking about farts or football or whatever boys talk about and when you're in high school. And this one guy, Alan, puts a chair in the middle of the room. Now, I was a junior in high school. Alan was a senior, and he was kind of like the de facto lieutenant of Young Life because we had the Young Life meetings at his house. So he was kind of like the second in charge. And he goes, "Why are we here?" Now, I've been to youth group for a long time, so I know exactly what you do when somebody asks something like that. You look at the ceiling. And that's what I did. But Alan did something different than like my youth pastor did. And he said, "Sam, why are you here?" And there were like 12 dudes in this dorm. And I was like, I knew that my real reason, like I'm just here to fill up my girlfriend in the hot tub, was not going to work. So I said, "I don't know." He was like, follow-up question. "How would you say that your relationship is with Jesus?" So now I've got like 10 other guys, 12 other guys like staring at me and answering this question. And I said, "Pretty good, I think. Like, pretty solid." And Alan said, "No. That is the wrong answer. Your relationship with Jesus can always be better." And then he turned to the rest of the group and he goes, "We can all have a better relationship with the Lord. We should always be working on it. And as teenagers, we are constantly tempted by drugs and alcohol and sex. And we should always be communing so that we can be better people." And then he was like, "Let's bow and pray." And so we all bowed and prayed. And I'm sure that no one in that room really cared about my answer. Even Alan, maybe, I don't know. But in my head, everyone in that room was like praying for and judging me. 6 hours is a really long time to contemplate your moral worth. And that's exactly what I did on the bus ride home from that camp trip. Because in my head, all I was thinking was, am I just using Jesus as my personal pimp? This was not great for the girl sitting next to me because we had this awesome blanket situation going on, and I was trying to inch away the entire time. And I told her that I was sick. But really all I was thinking was, don't touch me there, Jesus is watching. So after that, I did go to Young Life a little bit less and less. Honestly, not because of that situation necessarily, but because I got my driver's license and that opened up a lot of more social options. But every time I did go, I was forever afraid of this idea that like everyone was really looking at me and knowing why I was actually there. About a year later, after I had stopped going to Young Life, I went to this house party, and it was like one of these house parties that's out of a 90s teen movie. It was the only one I'd ever been to in my entire life. People were like falling out of windows, and there were fights on the front lawn, and it was like, she's all that, right? And as I was walking up the driveway, this dude came out of the front door, and he ran out and leaned over into the flower bed, and he threw up. And I was like, okay. But then I realized that it was Alan, the guy who had, like, called me out in front of all of these Young Life kids. And it took every single ounce of my self-control to not go and pat him on the shoulder and go, hey, man, how would you say your relationship with Jesus is right now? But you know, I didn't, because I realized that in that moment, in that dorm room, he was just trying to demonstrate his worth. He was just trying to be the person he wanted to be. Because at the end of the day, we all go to church for different reasons. Thanks so much.